excited to introduce our next speaker, Shelly. Shelly is the founder of the zero waste design tech startup SXD. She has spent 10 plus years specializing in zero fabric waste design. She's committed to reversing fashion's negative impact on our environment. In reality, she has witnessed firsthand growing up in Asia. She's an ex-creative director from Instagram, ex-Prada, and McKinsey, and a graduate of the Harvard Business School. Shelly has been invited to showcase her work at Milan Fashion Week and Cannes Lions. Her custom zero-waste wedding gown is currently on display in the award-winning museum exhibit, Fashioning America, and her work has been covered in Forbes, Fast Company, Elle, Harper's Bazaar, InStyle, and Women's Wear Daily. As founder of SXD, she has won Top Innovative World Technology at SXSW and the Global Change Award known as the Nobel Prize of Fashion. Shelly is also the inventor of 2 utility patents on design technology. Let's give a warm round of applause for Shelly.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, first of all, thank you all so much for being here. I know it's a weekend, so I really appreciate your time. I'm so excited to be here today. Actually, Paige, who is part of Impact Labs, is our newest engineer on the team. So I already have a great feeling about Impact Labs and everyone here. My name is Shelly, and I am the founder of a company called SXD. And what we do is we create zero fabric waste designs, and we scale that through AI technology. I'm gonna just talk a little bit about our company, but more importantly, I wanted to talk about my journey and how I started this company. So I grew up in China and Japan, and a lot of those places that I grew up in are manufacturing sites for clothing. So growing up, I knew that a lot of the places that I played in as a kid actually became textile waste and dumpsters as I was growing up. So this is something that I cared a lot about ever since I was really young. And in fact, later on when I went to college, I turned down an opportunity to fly to LA to design for Rihanna and her team to instead stay in school and study sustainability. It was the first year that my college, Columbia University, was offering sustainable development as a field of study. And I was so curious about it, and I knew that for me, it was more than just about being a fashion designer, because our world really doesn't need another fashion designer. There's so many amazing designers out there already, but instead, someone who can use knowledge around sustainability to create meaningful designs that actually makes a difference and get people to think differently. And so I don't know how many of you know this, but there's 92 million tons of fabric getting wasted every year in the fashion industry. That's about 1 garbage truck filled with fabric waste dumped or burnt every single second. So it's a really big problem. It's also a really stupid problem, honestly, because around $288 billion are wasted every year because of this fabric waste. So it's terrible for businesses to have this happen. So for SXD, our mission is to make this number 0. And I feel so proud because our team is really unique in combining design and engineering together from the very beginning to really think about how do you design clothing that we're all wearing right now in a way that has no fabric waste, and do it in a way that's scalable. Actually, when I started the company, I went to the head of engineering department at Harvard, and I said, I want to automate zero waste designs. Who in the world are the best to do this? And he gave me 2 names, and over 2 years, I tracked both of them down to work at this company with me. So Tuan Feng, who is from Adobe Research, and also Takeo from the University of Tokyo. So something I'm really proud of is that for our company, design and engineering work together from the beginning rather than being silos, which is something that's much more common, especially in the fashion industry. Okay. I won't go into too much detail, but something we're proud of is that we won design and engineering awards for what we do. But really, I want to start from the beginning and talk about my journey and a little bit more about what we do. So one of my earliest memory was actually sitting on a mini fridge with my parents in China. So growing up, I actually grew up in like a 70 square foot house that was so small that we could only fit either one desk or one bed, but not both. So my parents taught me this concept of creativity under constraint, which is given a very limited resources that you have and space that you have, how do you actually optimize that space and maximize creativity? And so they challenged me to rearrange furniture throughout the day and make living work. And that's how I learned about this idea of creativity under constraint, which is very much core to zero fabric waste designs. So when I went to Columbia University and started learning about sustainability, one of the first zero waste design I created was this one, which is I actually used plastic bags that I found in my dorm room that was like left behind, and I used like wax from my friends from their candles, and I created this little piece here. And actually, what happened after this was I used this as my content and shared it around, and that got me my first internship at Prada. It eventually helped me to get into Instagram. So it actually became something that really helped me a lot with my career. But while I was doing all that and thinking about how I was moving forward in my career, I started also thinking how I can actually use this idea of creativity on constraint and what I've learned from fashion design in a way that's actually better for impact and actually makes a difference. So when I started looking at the way we design clothing today, this is like a typical t-shirt. All the red that you see are actually fabric waste by design from the very beginning of time, and we've been designing clothes the same way for centuries. So a typical piece of clothing weighs like 10 to 30% of fabric from the beginning, which is pretty crazy, and it's something that we really should change. So I started thinking, well, if we can actually design things differently, maybe we can not only remove all that red that you see here, all the fabric waste, but also use way less material. And also if we start by designing with the material or the fabric constraints in mind, then we can do things that's much more efficient for our environment. And one of the things I'll just say is, I know fabric seems like one of the many elements that go into fashion or clothing, but actually fabric contributes to about 80% of the carbon emissions with the fashion industry. And it also contributes to about 20% of all the wastewater in the world. So it's actually a really, really big problem, and if you can address the issue of fabric, you're really addressing probably the most important root cause around sustainability in fashion. So when I first started this company, I actually created, now it's called Shelly Design, but it was an anonymous Instagram page. Because one of the things I thought was, well, no matter how sustainable a piece of clothing is, if people don't like how it looks, if they don't want to wear it, I'm just making more waste. So I actually created an anonymous Instagram account. I think it was called like Fake Art Fashion or something. And I posted just zero waste design concepts that I had in mind that I knew were zero fabric waste to test if it could work. And actually just in 2 months, we got about 20,000 followers. And then I started putting our designs for sale on the page, and I priced them around $300 because I thought if people are willing to buy a piece of clothing for $300 from an anonymous person who they don't know at all on Instagram, that probably means they actually really want the product. And we actually sold out the pieces, and that's how the company started. And so since then, we've done things like, for example, here, creating zero waste versions of t-shirts. So these might look like simple t-shirts, but they use about 45% less fabric than any other t-shirts out there, and there's no material waste there. So what you see here, the white t-shirt, is actually a collaboration we did with Allbirds. So we switched their shirts to zero waste. And then on this side, for the black shirt, we're actually currently working with one of the largest music label to turn their tour merch across their artists, starting with Ed Sheeran, actually, to zero waste designs. And it's also not just simple t-shirts either. So this is the example of what we did with Harvard Innovation Labs. So they really care about their branding of red and white. So what we did was we actually went to a factory in Bangladesh that worked with climate refugees, so people who lost their homes due to climate change. And we sourced materials that they had that was fabric waste lying around. So the white was actually neoprene that came from scuba diving sets. And then the red is actually from summer shorts that this facility was creating. And we were able to make these laptop bags for Harvard Innovation Labs using these materials. And then also we started also thinking about how do we push the boundary of zero waste design, because when people think of sustainable design, they tend to think it's kind of boring and it's really basic things. So we started creating things like this little black dress from Breakfast at Tiffany's and making that into a zero waste gown like you see here with all the curves and the tailoring. So this is actually also a zero waste version of the Breakfast at Tiffany's little black dress. And here's just another example of us using dead stock fabric, so fabric that's being left over from a brand called Vera Wang, and turning that into a wedding gown. And this is actually a museum display showing the circularity of that fabric going from Vera Wang gown to the design that we created. Another thing we did with the wedding gown was that we made sure that it was modular, so it had 3 different parts, so people can later actually wear just the pants on its own, or the top was jeans, so it becomes a lot more versatile, and you can actually wear it long after your wedding. And then what we decided to do after was really to scale this concept of zero waste design. So what you see here is we can actually map the different parts of the zero waste design with measurements on the body and also with fabric. So this is just a very simple this demo of that, but you can actually get a lot more complicated. And the reason why this is so important is with zero waste designs, it's actually been existing for thousands of years. Like the kimono, the sari from India, all of them are actually zero fabric waste designs. But one of the biggest problem with it is that it's really possible to scale manually, because every single time that you change size, every single time you change the fabric, you have to redesign everything to make sure that it's as efficient as possible. So what we did is that we actually trained our algorithm using the base data from the zero waste designs we created, and we also augmented that data set. And this is how we can match a sketch or a 3D art directly to a pattern of how you cut the fabric to create the zero waste piece, and you can also scale it in real time across sizes, across materials. So what that also means is that with just one zero waste design, you can actually really scale it across a lot more styles. And we've actually worked with companies where we created the entire collection with just one zero waste design loaded into our platform. It's just another example of that. So I won't go into too much detail. But the last thing I just want to end with before opening up for questions is that something that I'm personally the most proud of is that when we can actually create zero waste designs, we actually save so much on fabric that we really save our money, and we can transfer that cost savings to help people. And today, a lot of times workers are the worst paid in the garment industry. But with our products, what we found is that we save so much on our materials, and because we have no waste. So what we can do is actually pay workers 4 times the local wage to help them rebuild their homes, and to help them live much better while working with us. So we did exactly that when we worked with climate refugees in Bangladesh for almost all of our merch products. And these are people who have lost their homes because of floods, because of climate change, and there's actually going to be over 20 million people who are climate refugees in Bangladesh alone in the next years. So what we were able to do is work with them, hire them, train them to create zero waste designs. And actually so far we've been able to help them send their kids to school for the first time, have their 80, 90-year-old parents retire for the first time while working with us. So that's something that I'm really proud of for SXD. Okay, so that's it, and thank you so much.
Opening for questions now.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, this is wonderful work. This is really cool. I just wanted to ask, like, when your company works on creating zero waste designs, do you also integrate other like sustainability practices into the fabrics that you use, like the dyes and whatnot?
That's a really good question. So I know that right now there's a lot of things around like material innovation. So I have thought a lot about it. One of the things I realized, especially running the anonymous Instagram account, is that there's so much gray area around sustainability. And so I really try to, as much as possible with my team, to do things that's more clearly more sustainable. So for example, when it comes to sustainable materials, sometimes they're actually not that much better. So it's kind of a gray zone. For example, there are materials around like using like exoskeletons of like different animals, or like using mycelium for leather. But a lot of times that raw material is actually sourced in Asia, and then it gets shipped all the way to the US to be made, and then it gets shipped all the way across Europe for distribution. In the end, it's actually not that much better. So what we realized from the beginning is if we actually use existing fabrics that's already been made, so that way we're not treating it further, we're not dyeing it further, and using that as a starting point for our design as much as possible. So not having to create something new. That's usually the best by default for the environment. So that's what we try to focus
on. Hey Shelly, first of all, I want to reiterate that the work you're doing is amazing and very important. I just wanted to kind of go back to what you mentioned in the beginning of your presentation, which was that you passed up an opportunity to work with Rihanna, and I just wanted to know, like, what was the thought process that kind of went into that decision, and like, what were the factors that influenced you to pass up that opportunity?
Yeah, I think for me, I've always cared a lot about not just something looking pretty, but also something that actually has meaning. And in the beginning, I'm more of a designer by training, so I think when the opportunity came, I was so excited, but I also felt like when I can learn something around sustainability, then I can impact so many more people. While being able to have the opportunity to design for Rihanna would be really sexy as an opportunity, but I just feel like there are other things that's more meaningful. I will say though that that's not off the table, and I'm still in talks with her team, so it's
Hi, thank you so much for that talk. I have a kind of a big question, so or I feel like there could be like a lot to be discussed. But I'm just curious as to your thoughts on like how to more ethically engage in fashion, as you know, a designer, as a sustainable designer. Just what do you think?
Yeah, I actually would love to hear from the audience too what you think. From my side, I try as much as I can to not assume that I have all the answers. So I, as much as I can, try to have dialogue with people before I make decisions about like the products we create and what we put out in the world. I can actually give an example of that. So about a year or 2 years ago, we created this jacket that was actually our first project was climate refugees. This denim jacket. Basically, we used raw denim that were like roll and fabric. So what they are is like they're at the end of the roll. They're too narrow to create anything else. So when you go to places in Bangladesh, you see all these companies and manufacturers that have literally mountains of these narrow strips of denim. So we actually used that to create zero waste denim jackets. But when I got the first sample, I realized that it was bleeding a lot of indigo dye because when you don't treat it with any chemicals, it bleeds a lot of dye, and it becomes really hard for people to want to wear it again and again. So we weren't sure if we want to treat it with some chemicals, of course organic chemicals, but then there's some treatment, or we just keep it to be raw denim, so it's sustainable on paper, but then at the end of the day, people might never wear it because they're afraid of the dye coming off or having to wash it and dye the rest of their laundry. So we just did a poll and we asked people, here are the two options. What would you choose? And people actually said, actually, I want to be able to wear my jacket without worrying so much. So I'm okay with some organic chemicals, and that's what we went for. So for me, whenever there are those gray zones in sustainability, I try as much as possible to listen to others and come to solutions that I hear from other people rather than decide myself. You'll be next.
Thank you so much for this talk, Shelly. It was really inspiring. I was wondering, so what do you see as the kind of next steps and kind of future for SXD? Is it the platform? Is it products? What is kind of your thought, like in 10 years, 20 years, where can this great idea go?
Thank you. Thank you for calling me a great idea. I think so too. Yeah. I think in the immediate next step is we want to make our technology applicable for all the designs in fashion. So that way it's almost a no-brainer for people to turn all the things that we're wearing right now to zero waste because it's so much better for the environment. And if it also saves costs and saves on materials, it should be the standard. But something else I'm really excited about is the adjacent application of our technology to other industries. So actually, as Zoe has mentioned, we were at South by Southwest where we won the Top Innovative World Technology. And actually after that, BMW and Jaguar came up to us and asked if this can be applied to sheet metal in car manufacturing, which I thought was so crazy because when I think of cars, I think it's all 3D, it's totally different from fashion. But it turned out that when you're cutting sheet metal, it's 2D. And actually the way you attach them together, it's very similar to how you think about cutting fabrics. And you also start with a rectangular 2D space. And actually after that, then you have another machine to make it, shape it to 3D. So actually that process is not only super relevant, but also really, really wasteful today. So apparently 40 to 50% of sheet metal goes to waste in the cutting process. And I think it was like hundreds of millions of tons of sheet metal that goes to waste from that process, which is so insane and really crazy. So I'm really excited to see where our technology can be applied to beyond just fashion. Another industry is furniture manufacturing, which at first I thought furnitures are all rectangles, how can it be so wasteful? But it turned out like up to 40% of fabric is wasted in furniture design too. Which is just so crazy. So we're also looking to how we can make our technology useful there.
Thank you for sharing. It's clear that you're extremely intentional about the design of fabrics. I'm wondering also how you think about the overall garment's life cycle, from manufacturing to transportation to the end user's carbon emissions, and how you reduce those emissions over the whole life cycle of the product.
Yeah, I will say that that's the part that is very much a next step for us. When I started the company, there were so many directions we can go into, and I chose this direction because I felt like if I can tackle the fabric issue from a design standpoint, it can have so much impact on saving us on waste and also helping to lower the carbon emissions. But all the things that you were saying, I think is super important. And a lot of times when I think about things like that, I think about who can we collaborate with in the industry to make it happen. For example, one of my friends, he's founder of a really wonderful startup, and what they do is make sure that there's no inventory waste, because what we can do is to make sure that the designs themselves are zero waste, but at the end of the day, if the manufacturers manufacture too much, and in this industry, actually a lot of times, up to 40% of the production are overproduction that gets like marked down and just thrown away. So that's actually a big problem, and I love the idea of collaborating with other companies who have figured out other pieces of the puzzle to make this work. And to your point about consumers, I actually think that that is very much part of what we care about, because we really test our designs so much and make sure that they're actually great products, so that consumer would want to wear it and want to wear it over and over again. Another thing that we learned through our research that I'm actually curious what you all think is, we did some study on pricing, and how that actually impacts consumer behavior. Because the thing is, the problem with a lot of today's sustainable products is they're so expensive, especially when it comes to fashion. Like if you have a $2,000 jacket, yeah, it's sustainable, but nobody's gonna buy it because the average American family actually spends only a few $1,000s, like $1,000 to $2,000 on clothing a year. So $2,000 is out of the question. But if you price it too low, people might think that it's a throwaway item. So in our research, what we found is that if you price something like 20 bucks or under, people start to think, okay, I don't really have to like it that much to purchase it. Or maybe I'll just buy 10 of this and it's fine. So that's another issue. So what we try to do is to price in a way that's kind of like around 50 or like a few hundred if it's like a really nice item, so that people feel like they have a little bit of skin in the game when they're making the purchase. So anyway, I hope that answers your question, but we try to incorporate parts of the puzzle into our model as much as we can, and then we collaborate with others with areas that we haven't covered yet.
Thanks very much.
So I love how you're taking a really open-minded and thoughtful view of like your total overall impact. And so I was wondering about how you manage the day-to-day like distribution of your time between creating interesting designs and generating interest in this versus finding sort of large-scale collaborations that really have sort of an outsized impact.
Yeah, that's really hard because for me, I think I'm a designer. Like my nature is to be a designer. So if I could, my ideal job would be to collaborate with my amazing engineers, and I'll be the one creating like the data, the training data that are these zero waste designs that get more and more extreme in what the areas that they explore, so that we can really cover a lot of range. But you know, as a founder, and this is my first time founding a company, I'm realizing that so much of my time also has to be spent on just managing all of our partners, making sure that we actually grow the business, making sure that like we can be a sustainable company. So there's so much of that. We're actually growing our operations team now, so I can hand off more and more of those things. But I think as a founder, one of the things that I'm also learning is that I also have to constantly think about how I can better tell the story and not just make the product, which is my favorite part.
Thank you so much, Shelly, for your talk. I wanted to piggyback off of the question about garment life cycles. And what I've noticed, and I guess in the past couple of years too, is this concept of micro trends, right? And TikTok's going like, this is what you need to buy now, and Shein hauls, and getting all this clothing really cheaply and really quickly, and people's attention spans going. So I was wondering if you had any kind of temporal piece of what you're working on, like the time aspect of the instant gratification of buying clothing.
Yeah, actually, for me, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I don't think we have the exact answer, but I have some answers. So people talk a lot about trends, but actually at the end of the day, if I look around this room, for example, there are only a few silhouettes of clothing that we're all wearing. So actually, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how do we make sure those silhouettes are zero fabric waste, and then also so that way we covers the most types of designs. And I think another thing is how do you actually create clothing that really lasts? Because I think one of the issues with these micro trends is that because they happen so fast, so the clothing doesn't have to be so nice, and they fall apart after a few weeks, and that's okay. And I don't think that's the right way to make garments, even if consumers are okay with it. And I think we should actually make sure that our designs are really good. Something that we've done recently with the music label is that like that's, I guess, I don't think that's a micro trend, but for different tours you have different artists, so prints on them. So what we did is first we make sure the base design is as efficient as possible and it's zero waste. And then we also make sure that we're saving money on fabric savings, because it's a zero fabric waste design. We're instead investing it into not only labor but also into really great materials and great construction, so that the product can last for a long time. And then the third thing that we try to do is to do more on-demand manufacturing. So you don't make anything until people have ordered it. So that way you make sure that there's less inventory waste. So those are the things that we've done so far. But I also think it's really, you're right, it's a really tough problem to tackle, because I actually heard about this a couple of weeks ago from a friend that they did this like shirt print that was like really on trend, but then they miscalculated how big the trend was going to be, so they end up making like 100,000 of this shirt. Yeah, that like nobody wanted after 2 weeks. So I just think that's a really big problem, and I would like to address that. One other thing I will tack on is something we've been exploring with our team is to make our designs modular. So what that means is that, let's say a piece from your t-shirt, if it doesn't get used, you can actually take it apart and use that same piece for, let's say, like a part of a jacket. So the pieces for design become like Lego pieces that can be interchangeable. So that way, when trends change, you can actually interchange the like fabric pieces. You can recombine them to create new designs. So that's actually something we're actively exploring.
Hi, thank you for the talk. So kind of going off of that micro trend, right? Thinking about fast fashion, companies like Shein, I feel like it's really easy, especially for this younger generation, to just like see something on TikTok and then like see how cheap it is and be like, okay, I'm gonna get that, and not really think too deeply about where it comes from. Is it sustainably sourced? So I'm wondering, like, how do you go about amplifying your message and your mission of sustainability and somewhat influencing public perception or making it easy or more visible to see kind of that impact?
I guess I have two potential answers for that. So the first one is, and I'm constantly learning, so I'd love to hear you all too about what you love about Shein, for example. But so first is, I think in general, I would love for us to just tell our sustainability story better. Because I think a lot of times when people think of sustainable fashion today, they think that it's expensive, they think that it's not the coolest design. And I really want to change that and make people feel like sustainable fashion feels like the future rather than the past. Something that I think is okay, but maybe not as inspiring is, I feel like a lot of times sustainable fashion gets branded like the past. Like, oh, using old stuff, or like, like it's okay that you wear this thing that's like basic. But I think people at the end of the day want things that feel exciting, and they still care about the fashion element of this industry. So I think it's really important for us to tell our stories better so that it feels like the future, not just the past. The other thing I will say is that actually my team and I would try to actively learn from companies like Shein, because what they're good at is that they're so versatile when it comes to manufacturing. So what they've done is that they have such a great network that they built over time, that they're able to churn out products so quickly. And actually they do a lot of times produce on demand. And that's how they make sure their inventory is very, very good. And I think that's something that actually a lot of sustainable fashion brands should learn from, is to have that kind of versatile process for producing clothing. I also feel like one of the reasons why I started this company is I eventually would love to have a no compromise solution that's sustainable, because I hope that the sustainable products that's zero waste, they can actually compete in terms of pricing with, I don't know about Shein because they use like really bad labor, but like at least with, like a lot of the other more affordable brands. I mean, something I've been proud of is for example, with the music label I was talking about. So we were actually able to, I mean, a lot of music labels, they tend to use very, very cheap labor. What we were able to do was actually be competitive in price, so actually offer products that's the same price as what they're used to, but where they skimmed out on labor, we saved in material cost. So we were able to have a much more higher quality and have zero waste designs that saved a lot on fabric instead, to be competitive on pricing. So that's the place that I would like for us to innovate even more in, so that we can actually be a less compromising solution that's sustainable.
I've always just kind of wondered how much of the fashion industry is, how much of the fashion industry would you say is like amoral?
I'm not sure. I don't know if I know, but I actually think the industry is changing a lot. When I first started this company, I actually went to all these manufacturers in the garment district, and I told them about my idea, and nobody wanted to work with me. And I actually remember calling up this boutique shop in New York and told them about the zero waste design idea. They forgot to hang up on me, and then they made fun of me for like 5 minutes, and I was like, oh, I'm here. But now we actually have all these amazing brands calling us up and want to work with us and want to collaborate. I remember a couple weeks ago we were talking to Coach, and they found out about us, and they came to us on their own. And I really feel like this industry is changing when people actually want to make a difference, whether if it's because it's about saving money through us, or if it's to really make the world more sustainable. I'm not sure, but I think that's even more important for us to make sure we're a win-win solution where we can help them be sustainable and save on costs at the same time.
Hi, Shelly. So thank you again for your talk. I just wanted to ask about, you said at the beginning of your talk that design and engineering kind of work together from the beginning and they're not really siloed, so they're not just like working in isolation and then have correspondence like at the end of a project. So I was just wondering if you have some examples of what that kind of looks like at your company.
Yeah, so our designers work with engineers every day. So all the products, all the designs that we create, we actually immediately bring that to our engineers. And we also share with them, so we have these huge documents of design rules where we share, like, this is why we designed this way, so that in the end it's a good design, it fits people well. So from the beginning, all of the designs that we create are zero waste is really transparent, the reason and the logic behind, the rules behind why this design is been done this way. So we really try to systematize the process. And also the way we work with engineers is super iterative. So a lot of times what I would do, so I would meet with our engineering team twice a week, and we'll review things, and I'll figure out what are the parts that are especially difficult. And given those parts, we'll actually try to design around it in the beginning, so we can actually create designs that don't have to rely on the really technically difficult aspects, and then create time to make sure that we have time to work on them in the background. And then I guess the other thing is all of our priorities around features is determined from both the design side and the engineering side. So everything that we try to build, we make sure that it has a maximum impact in terms of scaling our design, but at the same time, the timeline makes sense from the engineering side. And we never promise our customers or brands anything until both teams are okay with the workload and with what we promised. So I guess those are the ways that we work together.
Hi, Shelly. Yeah, it's so interesting to hear about your work. It's super cool. I had a question about, you were, of course, mentioning Shein and fast fashion and how, tremendously popular it is, but also kind of like the human and ecological toll. And I'm curious because you also mentioned that statistic about, most American households can only spend $1,000, $1,500 on clothes. So it is hard to put the burden on individual consumers when options like this exist. How do you see like your role in kind of pushing fashion towards something that's more sustainable and more, reducing the human toll? Do you think the burden is on you guys to kind of optimize your systems and technology, or do you think it's on like larger brands you're partnering with, or maybe even like governments? Because I know like some European countries are putting more kind of institutional focus on like circularity and things like that. Like, where do you see the energy coming from, and where do you think the results are going to come from?
Yeah, first and foremost, I think for me as a founder of a company, I feel really responsible to make sure that our products are accessible to people. I think it's unfair to expect the next generation who are just starting to make some money to drop a lot of money to buy something that's sustainable. And I think it's responsibility of my responsibility and others to make sure that we actually create accessible products that are sustainable and that is a real product in the market for people. And then to your point, I actually see a lot of energy from all across and all around. So from the government side, I definitely feel like because Europe is so on top of it, there's actually laws around fining companies if they waste materials. And because of that, some of our best customers are in Europe. But in New York, I also see that starting to happen. I think there's a law that's proposed, but it's not passed yet. That's around fining companies who are in the fashion industry for not actually being as sustainable as they should be. So I really feel a lot of intent from the legal side, and we really try to take advantage of that. And then to your other point, so the reason why I started this company is I was actually thinking, what are ways to scale sustainable products that can be more accessible and can potentially in the future compete with companies like Shein or fast fashion companies? Because I think it's unrealistic to be like a sustainable company and just be like, just by saying that we're sustainable, people are going to come to us. I think that alone is not going to be enough. In fact, if you look at like surveys of consumers saying like why they purchased a piece of clothing, like sustainability is like middle or toward the bottom. Like it has to fit you well. It has to be something that's affordable to you. It has to look great. All those things come before. So when I started the company, I actually thought about what can we possibly do where we can check those boxes too, in addition to sustainability. And so by saving fabric, so by the way, the best technology today, other than ours, it can save about 4% on fabric. For us, we save about 40, sometimes 46% on fabric. So by doing that, you really cut down on the cost by being really efficient with your design. And it opens up a lot of opportunities to be able to check boxes around accessibility, affordability, in addition to sustainable.
Okay, we have time for one last question.
So this question is kind of similar, like a follow-up on what you just answered. So like when I'm browsing like clothing on Zara or like Shein, actually not Shein, like Uniqlo, they have labeled like sustainability, but usually the price is higher than like the usual material. So like for some people who doesn't have any knowledge about sustainability or zero cost, zero waste design, how do you let them know or like convince them to buy like the higher price product instead of like the lower price?
That's a really good question. Actually, whenever we work with brands, we try to tell them to price it the same or even less than their average designs, because we know that if it's zero waste, like using our technology, you save on fabric and it actually should cost you less. So therefore you can transfer some of that saving to your end user, your end customer. And so that's what we really try to convince people to do, and people are actually pretty open to it. Because actually companies, they also know that just by putting a sustainability label and like pricing a lot higher, it also creates some issues with consumers and they don't sell as well sometimes. So they're actually pretty open to that too. But I think the reason why so many sustainable products that are labeled sustainable are more expensive is because the method in which they are sustainable actually ends up costing more. And I actually think that's a big problem, and that's why I'm really excited about the company we're building where we can cut cost and be sustainable, because what they would do is, with organic fibers with really sustainable materials that takes a lot of money to process. Even when you recycle fabrics, it takes so much energy that sometimes it's actually more energy than good to have that product at the end. But all that processing actually adds to the cost, adds to the complexity, makes it harder to manufacture, and makes it harder for people to adopt. So as much as possible for us, we try to bypass that. And in fact, our algorithm is it uses multivariable optimization, and it looks at not just how you can make sure that it's a zero waste design, but how do you have the fewest number of cuts? How do you have the fewest amount of material so that it's actually a simpler design and makes the product simpler and easier to make rather than harder?
Thank you so much, Shelly, again for your amazing talk.